Why, hello.
And here we are. Back.
It took me a while to figure out. I don't know if people saw that little placard. Figuring out Roman numerals for 249 is hard, but I can't. I couldn't not list our episode number in the Super Bowl format, which
in the Super Bowl format.
I mean, I don't want to make disparaging comments about average football watchers, but I'm pretty sure most people who watch football don't readily know the Roman numerals off the top there either. So, but it is interesting. Not. It's an interesting aesthetic. It adds a sense of grandeur and gladiatorial majesty to it all.
Absolutely. And 249 that's kind of cool because we're on the cusp of 250.
I know, like we always talk about
quarter century,
some big thing. Like we did it for number like 50, 10, 200, nothing.
I know we've been trying to have a cool party at these big numbers and failing over and over again.
It's said like this. A lot of time has passed. We've been doing this for almost a couple of years now, right?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Right.
Lots changed.
20 months. Lots changed.
Yeah, in lots of different ways. And a lot of people who are on Facebook, because this is the primary place I think people watch this is through Facebook, that aren't on Facebook right now anymore. And I noticed that like CK is one of them. I'm remembering like I can't remember if it was for an episode or because it was close to my birthday, but he brought me a bottle of mezcal one day.
Oh, that was good. You
Even
didn't share it with me.
Well, I think it was a birthday related thing or something, but like, or because I mentioned loving palomas or mezcal. But anyways, that was totally tied in with the show. And yeah, you should have gotten at least I should have at least made a libation.
One sip.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It was good though.
So that time I came over and you were lying on the floor and there was an empty bottle next to you.
And then there was a sweet smoky scent emanating from my glistening forehead.
That's right. So CK's gone from Facebook. Yeah, I haven't seen him.
Well, it's winter and I mean, it's a pandemic. And, this is I think a lot of people understand this, but unless you live in a cold climate in the Northern Hemisphere, like I don't think you can really understand how horrible February is on mental health collectively. Like, especially in a pandemic, but February is a depressing time of year because it's the dead of winter.
Yeah,
we're still climbing back from the longest night of the year, or the longest day. Yeah, longest night. And even people who like winter, like me previously, before my estrogen made it hard for me to stay warm. Fuck that. But like it's just seasonal affect hits at a collective chilling level.
Yeah, no, people are over it. And like I'm sitting in a blizzard right now and I can see about 10 feet out the window and people are just done. They're completely done. So
all right. Just to pivot, this is why the Super Bowl matters a lot to people.
Right.
Because really, I mean, yes, we have Valentine's Day and there's St. Patrick's Day is coming up and there's like presidents in there and some stuff. It's not I don't think it's a coincidence that Black History Month, it's like, let's just pick the shortest month of the year when people are depressed. Give that to them. Like there's some of that. But like really the big celebratory big bang thing for a lot of people in the dead of winter is the Super Bowl, which I don't, like I was telling Dan before, like 2 minutes before we were going to go live, I'm like, oh yeah, Dan, I haven't seen the Super Bowl. I don't watch football and I didn't watch the halftime show, but I know who all those people are. I guess hopefully that's enough for us to have a conversation.
This will continue our great tradition of talking about things that we maybe know nothing about.
Well, I mean, that's most of things at some level.
Yeah, so last weekend was the Super Bowl. And, many years ago, the Super Bowl used to happen on the home field of the designated home team. But then that meant that sometimes the Super Bowl was happening up north in the winter, and people hated that and were pissed off about that. So now the Super Bowl always happens in a nice, warm, sunny place. And so this year it was in Los Angeles, which also happened to be the home field of one of the teams. That was sort of cheating a little bit, but
I think that's not fair.
And then the big thing, though, was that for the first time ever, there were actually black rap artists in the halftime show. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, the NFL, in terms of the players, this is a whole other um, sort of connected issue. But in terms of the players, the NFL is 75% black.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, they pretty much all listen to rap. At least I'd be willing to bet that 99+% of them do. And so you would think that in 30 or 40 Super Bowls there would be one halftime show where there would be black rap artists, but there have not been. And this is another great example of our particularly racist culture and the way in which football very much reflects a lot of the racist and capitalist heritage of this country. And so, I was really excited about this halftime show, which was great. A lot of the halftime shows are actually not that great. I mean, they're big performances, but they're not that terrific. But this one was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And like clockwork, white people collectively lost their shit. And so we thought we'd talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's just interesting. And then and then our viewer numbers aren't super high. And some sports ball is hard for some people. But this is about the Super Bowl, but it's not about the Super Bowl.
Right.
And this is fascinating because the things I've seen from the outside, because I didn't watch it, I've seen Super Bowls before because I've been at the parties. This is not a Super Bowl party kind of year because of the pandemic. So no one invited me. But in the past, the Super Bowl halftime show is kind of not a big deal like it is now. Like it's become more respected as a major showcase. And so there is something about who it features. And it shows it reveals that there's still this weird reaction to rap as intrinsically kind of containing the worst elements of society. Like that's the white kind of crap music.
Oh yeah, right.
That's thuggish, violent, misogynistic, and those charges can be made. Those charges can be made in for a lot of forms of music. But
right.
rap music gets emphasis on this for some obvious sorts of reasons. So there's that kind of piece, but then there's also this weird generational shit that's been floating around too with this, where I read a couple articles about it because it's just so funny to me. So boomers, which this whole framing of things is kind of a trick anyways of capitalism, I think, just the whole generational divide, overemphasizing it. But boomers are the people who liked the music that came before the emergence of rap and then as a major form, to dominating form in the 90s, who don't like it. Millennials who look at these performers with nostalgia. So people are saying this is the millennials moment. And then all these sad Gen Xers were like, all those people performing are Gen Xers. Why won't you ever notice this?
Right.
And being sad, and people, and a lot of it being lighthearted, but some people take that stuff very seriously. That somehow this is about generational disrespect, which adds a whole weird veneer, because that ties in with racism too, because the whole generational linking is in the white conservative imagination. There was the time before where it was glorious and things started going bad in the 60s.
Right. Yeah. And so, within white circles and definitely this is a generational thing. So, people who are older, there is this idea that rap is this absolutely horrible thing. And, it's dumb and it's, just thuggish and, all these negative attributes. It's not music.
It doesn't
So
require
here's
artistry or skill the
doesn't
way other music.
require artistry.
Yeah, these sorts of things.
Yeah. So here's just one really fascinating statistic. Somebody wanted to look at this and did a vocabulary analysis of different art forms. And so they looked at rock music, they looked at, opera, they looked at Shakespeare, they looked at rap, and they ran some kind of analysis about, the range of vocabulary, right? How many different words were used in these different art forms. And you know which one has the highest vocabulary usage?
I have no way of guessing right now. This doesn't seem like you're making me. Just kidding. Well, I think we know the answer.
Yeah, it's rap.
Right.
Right? So rap, it turns out, is actually the most linguistically complex, which, there's all kinds of ways that we can assess different things and different art forms. But if we're talking about, intelligence, certainly vocabulary usage is one sign of intelligence, and intellectual prowess and all that. Turns out that rap is the most. It's more than Shakespeare. Shakespeare came in second. And so, this is just one little piece of data that needs to cause us to say, when some, white guy says, oh, rap is dumb, it's like, well, who's really dumb here? And what are we really talking about? Because the fact is that whatever else we want to say about it, rap as an art form is definitely not dumb.
Yeah, and of course there are dumb practitioners within the field. Like it's not like just like everything else, but like people, the pushback I get to this is like, well, what about? I'm like, yeah, okay, that doesn't. You're not making a point.
No.
And then a friend of mine, and I wish I could have had this ready. A friend of mine posted something about how they notice that one of the only genres that someone will go out of the way to say that they don't like is rap or country. So they'll say, I like every form of music, well, except rap, country. Like they'll say things like that. And they said, well, what is it about people that makes them go out of the way to say they don't like something? And then people lost their shit in the feed because they were saying that somehow if I don't like rap, does that mean I'm racist? I'm like, well, no, but the fact that you missed the point gives me some pause. You somehow think it's okay to go out of your way to diss rap music, and this is kind of part of what's at play. Like I probably 5% of my listening stuff is hip hop. Part of it's because I grew up being one of those racist people who didn't like rap for those racist reasons. And so it's not part of my nostalgia bank. I've had to develop it. So almost all the 5% or whatever that I listen to that's hip hop has been from my adulthood, learning to appreciate it. So it's more recent. And so I've gone back and started appreciating some of the old school stuff. But there is this sort of like, that has to be interrogated. Like, I don't want to suggest that everyone has to love NWA or 50 Cent. I didn't say it right, but whatever. But why? Let's look at why people have a reaction to this stuff, especially like Snoop Dogg. It's funny to me. Snoop Dogg is still controversial figure. He's baked with Martha Stewart. To me, he's almost like Mr. Snuffleupagus to me at this point. He's like one of these teddy bears of like kind of American like iconography of like this kind of. He's like Willie Nelson. Like him and Willie Nelson are friends. He also occupies a similar place where he's kind of part of the fabric of America in a way that is, yes, like I'm sure he has some stuff in his past, but like at this point he's very cuddly and inoffensive. So this idea that somehow he is scary to people is bizarre to me. That any of these people at this point are seen as scary, threatening stuff that we have to protect our youth from is bizarre to me.
Yeah. Well, and to me, it very much has to do with this the history of all of this, right? So as somebody that grew up in Los Angeles and grew up as rap was coming into existence and as the war on drugs was ramping up and as the LAPD was turning into this basically armed gang that was attacking Compton, and grew up in the midst of NWA and all these folks starting to sing. There's no question in my mind that this is really tied into the process for liberation in America around race and racism. And so, when people automatically have these knee-jerk reactions to these folks, it has nothing to do with the music, as far as I'm concerned. What it has to do with is it's the same exact thing that we're seeing happening now, related to CRT and this whole stuff about teaching our history. This exactly the same problem. Theory, right? Yeah, critical race theory, right? That there is a very significant segment of the mostly white population that does not want to deal with what America really is and how America has always been. Yeah. And, and look, I mean, we've been having 2 years of uprisings and conversation related to the police. And, this was one of the central issues, right? I mean, when NWA got up and at a concert and said, "Fuck the police," and, then the LAPD charged the stage and arrested them. And I mean, this is a long-standing issue in this country.
My little.
There you go.
Get this in this one. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and so that's what's getting triggered here. I would suggest that it has very little to do with music or musical taste, which, yeah, I mean, obviously everybody has their own musical taste, and that's fine.
Hip hop, rap are distinct. So like this, sometimes it's not like it sounds like country music, and if country music's your thing, whatever. But I mean, this is part of that old white American tradition of vilifying things almost preemptively. Like, so it's why, anyone who knows the story about the war on drugs, with why we call it marijuana as a way of trying to, let's reinforce how it sounds vaguely Mexican and have it be tied to like the dangerous elements, even though there's not really a lot of violence associated, like naturally. If it weren't for like cartels being like lucrative, the most violent thing about marijuana would be like you getting a violent case of the munchies. Like that's really and the violent speed at which you drive to White Castle at 2:00 in the morning.
All right, so we've got a bunch of comments, which is great. Let's get to those.
Yeah, Gus says Walter Brueggemann talks about American football as being one of the religions of the U.S.
Absolutely, maybe the dominant religion.
Yeah, there's variations, and that's a whole other conversation topic. But like the social kind of performances that we engage together that give us meaning around the things that we think are most valuable and important in life. That's kind of what religion is, and football fits into that. To me, I think my number one pick would be like the whole Black Friday to Christmas kind of shopping season.
Shopping,
religious, the number one American religious festival, and it has nothing to do with Christianity in particular. See, this is where the context, like I wish there's a little timestamp on these things.
Right. Well, there is, but we just can't remember what we were saying then.
Oh yeah, it does, but yeah, that's true. Somewhere on 10:08. Karen writes, yes, we got the shortest month. I'm getting more into Black August, which honors our resistance to oppression, and we center Black joy and togetherness.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, nice.
Veronica writes, not a huge Super Bowl fan, but I'm interested in what might be discussed here. Thus far, I've heard nothing but rave reviews across color lines. Yeah, most of the people I know really were into it. But then
there were a lot of
the internet
not rave reviews. Yeah.
The number of conservative websites that thought of it as racist itself because it's so anti-white. That was
because there were no white people.
I mean, Eminem was in there.
That's right. Exactly.
He didn't even knelt. That's also a whole other controversy because they were like that the NFL got upset about it, but then people were saying no, he kept doing during practice, so like we knew, and like, well, I don't know what the truth is in there, but it's fascinating that this is still something like Eminem kneeling like years now after Colin Kaepernick is kind of funny that this is like something that people have to fret over. Gus writes, I think it's Aphex Twin spelling was the artist that came out by far and away with the highest vocabulary. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, anyone who doesn't think it takes skill, like I've been at karaoke when white people try to do rap. And I've been at karaoke when people try to sing like just different songs, and rap is incredibly complicated. Like it's not this easy, simple thing, and it's not just spoken word poetry in some sort of vague sense. There's a lot to it. So I find it funny when people try to minimize how simple it is somehow when it's totally not. Veronica writes, not sure I agree with that. I very regularly state that I like all music except heavy metal, which seems to bother my spirit greatly. Well, I'm not. My point wasn't that we shouldn't just single out like, oh, I like all kind of music except for that. It's just there's something about when we do that with rap. And then this original post of a friend with country, because I think he was making a connection around class, but with specifically people who will go out of their way saying they hate rap up front. Like, why is that? I think a much more, sorry, Jonathan, if you're listening, but there's a much bigger case to be made for why metal can be hated. But whatever. Yeah. Tyler writes, it was hilarious in typical Snoop style for him to be crouching down behind the soundstage, smoking a joint right before he went out. And then why is that even newsworthy?
I know, exactly. That was another very funny thing to me. All these people were like, Snoop Dogg was high right before. It's like, Snoop Dogg is always high. Why is this news? This isn't news. Like, of course.
I mean, it'd be off-brand for him not to get high right before.
Yeah.
Weird. Adam writes, street vocabulary is considered more vulgar, but there's nothing more gross in hip-hop or rap than any other genre. In fact, mainstream white rock is often much more problematic on the whole when you really listen. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, this is the thing. Like, I don't. Maybe it's just because the shittiness in like other forms of like predominantly white music we're just used to as white people. Like maybe that, I don't know, but like it's not. I mean, like when I became a Christian, I almost said came out as a Christian. That's interesting, little Freudian thing going on right there. When I became a Christian, we had like burning barrels for comic books and stuff in our youth group, and we had to get rid of music, but we didn't have to get rid of country. So country music was okay, and Christian albums, and so I had to get rid of all my other secular stuff. And I look back, and then I'm like, you know what? I still listen to some country. It's less than 5% at this point, and it's anything I do is entirely nostalgia. And there's some problematic crap in there.
Yeah.
Mostly the worst of the genre accurately reflects the values of the USA.
Yeah, and I think, Adam, I think when you were on the show with us, we spent some time talking about this, how, how some of the rap music that got lifted up commercially in many ways was sort of intentionally the most problematic, right? And so I think that's the other thing that is important, and this is where highlighting one person or one thing is very, very difficult, because you have to say, well, who are the folks who get the contracts with the big white-owned record studios versus who are the, local artists and community on the streets that may never get that. And there's often a big, big difference. So,
Since Adam, I know you're listening, I'd love your thoughts on that, because I know you know a fair bit about the history and the
Yes.
context
Yeah.
and the politics of this stuff. Jennifer writes, Eminem isn't white. The race draft on Chappelle's show drafted him as black. I don't think I saw that episode, but I guess that makes it official.
Well, or there are several layers of problem right there.
Yeah,
But
so people
anyway.
know there's a laugh cry emoji right there, kind of like at the end. So this was a tongue-in-cheek comment. Adam writes, hip hop and rap are also differentiated by cultural context or lack thereof in which it's created. Rap is something you do and generally implies doing something to appeal to pop audiences, and hip hop is something you live. Yes, thanks for that.
That's great.
Yeah, and as Deborah points out, it's legal for him to have pot in California. I mean, this is funny to me. Like
Right.
at this point, it's totally legal in lots of places, but even where it's not, it's like people get busted for pot because the cops want to arrest you anyway, and that's a reason they can use. Generally speaking, the police do not give a shit about enforcing pot usage unless they have a other reason.
Yeah.
Like that's generally how it works. So the fact that it's controversial, like this idea, like the fact that Biden even still's like, it's a gateway drug, like gateway to gaining 20 pounds because there's a lot of Cheetos around. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you talking about? Adam writes, right, this limited number of record labels sign and promote artists that reinforce their own biases, chiefly among them racist views of who communities of color are, primarily black communities.
Yeah. And and for those of you who don't know, Adam is a great musical artist and visual artist himself. You should check out his stuff, which is phenomenal. And and this
performing under the name Seymour Perspective.
Yes, Seymour C as an SEE, more MORE perspective. And one of the really again kind of telling things about this, and I think it gets back to a little bit back to the point we were talking about earlier, and Veronica was talking to. Many of the people who say, the white people who say, "Oh, I like all kinds of music except rap," have never actually really listened to rap. Right? And they maybe have heard rap coming out of somebody's car as they drive by or something like that, or they just have these preconceived notions. And so, and this is where, again, this automatically plays into this very racist trope, right? And there are many people then, when they actually sit down and listen to some things or go to a show or, particularly or a smaller venue where somebody is doing this, they're like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, this is actually pretty great. Right.
I mean, it is interesting. And like, I mean, it's not the same. I just want to make this clear, but sometimes people will dump on punk music, and punk music at a point had was tied up in class kind of issues. And so like if people dissed on it, it was like a classist thing, but that's not quite the case anymore. But so I want to recognize, like, when people's rejection of hip hop and rap is much more charged this way, but like oftentimes people just only know the stereotypical versions of the thing. So like, why would I like punk? It's like, well, that's not all what punk is. And it's like anything, like any kind of new food. Like if you've only ever had one type of, like you only ever had pad thai and you judge all of Thai food for that. And then one day you have like a nice spring roll with Thai flavors and you like it. And then you're able to go back 6 months later and try a pad thai and now you love it. Like there's a lot of taste is complicated, nuanced, and appreciation is developed. And understanding often comes before. Like for me personally, I learn how to appreciate stuff by understanding the history. Like, so watching documentaries about jazz helped me appreciate jazz So now I can listen to it because I now have a vocabulary of what to listen for. And so that's another piece of this. Like, look, I don't want anyone to feel ashamed if they just actually genuinely don't like some of the aesthetics of rap, but I want to at least ask people to consider, like, what is it about it that makes me avoid the possibility of appreciating it?
Right.
And given that it's probably the dominant musical form on the planet at this point, given that it's tied in with Black oppression, the oppression of Black people by white supremacist society, maybe it's worth white people spending more time just trying to appreciate it, even just out of a small sign of respect. Whether or not you like it or not is maybe beside the point. Just enough to where you can like understand the vocabulary of it, so that you don't think it's all just the tropes. Because really, like Kendrick Lamar, like he was probably maybe one of the youngest people. I don't know if he's the youngest, but it was all West Coast as far as I understand it, West Coast kind of style rap, except for again Eminem in there. But Kendrick Lamar he's to my son, he'd be old school at this point, but to me, I still think of him as recent. He's one of these examples of someone who's kind of like, I don't know, third generation in, where there's a lot of artistry that has, like, he was getting a lot of acclaim, and like he became the kind of the hip hop, the rap artist that a lot of white people in college would say, I love him. And it was like, see, I'm not racist. So he might be a good starting point for people who cringe around rap, of all the people who are on the stage. But all the people that are big names and legends, not just because it was some sort of pandering thing, because they're actually the big names and legends within that generation of West Coast rap. And then there's Eminem.
And you know, again, if you don't know a lot about these kinds of things, you're interested in finding more, I would really recommend the movie Straight Outta Compton. And
is that the biopic about NWA?
Yep. Really, really well done. And it, you know, and from another point of view, right, the discernment point of view of what is life-giving. You know, if you look at those 5 people that were playing, the amount of success that they've had, the way that they have elevated young people, the businesses that they've created, the other artists that they have helped. I mean, we're talking about incredible human beings, every single one of them, and all of whom have done immense good for their communities. And one of the ironic things that a number of people pointed out, because there were all these folks that were like, oh, this is this terrible drug culture and blah, 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 is that a number of them have now embraced sobriety and are big fans for health and healing, and have been sober for decades, which I found that particularly funny as a criticism of who they were. So yeah, we would just encourage you to, if you don't know a lot about this, to check out more about it. And yeah, it's a great awareness development. And if you did not see the show because you're not into sports ball, I'm sure you can find it on the internet. It was a great show. I'd really recommend watching it.
Yeah, usually
it was really fun. I really wanted them to keep playing and not have the second half.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I ever watched the Super Bowl, like unless I'm invited to a person's house, is because I'm curious about the commercials, which nowadays you can just watch after.
Not that good either.
And the shows are hit and miss, but like, you know, they're the legendary halftime shows that are up there.
Yeah, this one was really good. So, all right, last few comments, and then we're going to sign off.
Yes, okay, that's valid. I'm assuming you're talking about like,
the people that haven't even listened to rap, or hip hop,
Tyler writes, I was a huge commercial rap fan in high school, but it wasn't until I played PS3 game Tony Hawk's Underground that I found a new love for underground hip hop music. That's where it gets really interesting. And again, like Adam is a good resource on this, like especially in the local Twin Cities scene. For those of you who watch, like, it's really like your local scene has its own music and there's its own underground, and it's just totally a way to put down roots in where you live to kind of find out this stuff that's being created, hip hop, different sorts of genres and styles. It's worth doing. But yeah, like I love that PS3 kind of brought you into that. For me, it's obscure documentaries, but there's ways of kind of accessing this that fit everybody in a way, I think. Mm-hmm. Adam writes, I always say that generalizing whole genres you don't like is like saying I don't like food. It's just too many styles and approaches for that to make any sense. Well, it's reductionistic. Yep. To use the food analogy further, people saying I don't like Chinese food. Right. Chinese food is the most complicated and diverse food category probably in the world, for the obvious reason that there's billions of Chinese people in different regions and ecosystems. So, I mean, I don't want to exactly claim that hip hop culture is like China, but it's not that dissimilar. Like, especially when you look at the global scale.
Yeah, I was going to say internationally, right? I mean, now this is,
there's so much out there, and it's very diverse and different. It's not all the same. Adam writes, the book Can't Stop, Won't Stop by Jeff Chang is a comprehensive and definitive history of hip hop.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
And I know there's Netflix has some kind of histories of hip hop documentaries, like series that are accessible. I'm sure there's things to quibble with there, but it seemed like from my very outsider perspective, at least it was informative and gave me some framework, and that was helpful. Karen writes, I also feel like people focus on the men in rap and hip hop. Thank you for saying that. There are so many great women. I call them
femcs.
Femcs, yeah, femcs, like MC Light and Rhapsody, who are underrated and ignored. Thank you for that. Yeah, you're right. Catherine writes, as a folk songwriter, I'm constantly amazed by how many more lyrics, clever rhymes, and artistry hip hop artists can pack in per bar. Some of my favorites that Adam has introduced me to are The Coup, Black Delicious, and De La Soul. Yeah. Adam writes, throw a bouncy ball in any direction, you'll hit a rapper or MC or producer. Each will be wildly different.
Yeah.
Make sure it's not one of those really hard ones, because you don't want anybody to get hurt.
Bouncy ball.
Catherine writes, the local artist album Post Race is also a really cool activist hip hop project within anti-racist themes. Could be a good entry point to give that a listen. And then Veronica, I'll give you the final word before we close out. I go to Super Bowl gatherings only to accompany my husband. I basically find a quiet spot in the host house and read during and ask that I'm called to come and watch the halftime show. This one ranked with Prince for me. Yeah, Prince is one of the other ones. I think people.
That's awesome.
Rightfully named. Thanks for another good discussion. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, it's also the food. Like, I'm really disappointed when I get to a thing and they just have like chips and dips, and there's no like wings or like cultivated nosh. So
there we go.
Here's Adam under the wire. Usually people would say throw a rock, but like, why would you do that?
Yeah, unless you're way out in the middle of nowhere. Then sometimes throwing rocks is fun.
Well, usually into a lake.
Not towards people.
Scratch centers DJing or turntablism, and has a great solid history. Has a solid history as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been great. Thanks a lot, and really appreciate all the wisdom and the resources. And have a good week. Mm-hmm. If you're near a blizzard, stay safe.
Stay safe.
And we'll see you next Friday.
See you next week, everybody. And we won't be two white people talking about rap, probably. But you never know.
You never know.
Never know.